The engagement ring was still in my jacket pocket when I watched my girlfriend kiss another man. Not on a screen, not in an old photograph. I saw it with my own eyes through the front window of a quiet restaurant on East Maple Street in Greenville, South Carolina. I wasn't supposed to be there. Neither was she. For nearly a minute, I just stood outside in the cold, holding a small white jewelry box inside my coat, while the woman I planned to marry smiled at someone I had never seen before. Then he reached across the table. She didn't pull her hand away. She intertwined her fingers with his like they'd done it 100 times. That was the exact moment my future disappeared. People always ask whether I confronted her. No. Real betrayal doesn't always create anger first. Sometimes it creates silence so heavy you forget how to breathe. I turned around before she could see me. I walked 3 blocks without knowing where I was going. When I finally stopped, I realized my hand was still wrapped around the ring box so tightly that the corners had dug into my palm. I never gave it to her. My name is Rowan Mercer. I was 33 years old when everything I believed about love collapsed in a single evening. Back then, I worked as a commercial architect. Nothing glamorous. Mostly office buildings, medical centers, and apartment renovations. I loved solving problems nobody else noticed. A crooked foundation, a bad drainage plan, a wall that looked straight until you measured it. Funny enough, I never noticed the cracks inside my own relationship. Her name was Sienna Hale. She wasn't loud or dramatic. People trusted her almost immediately. She remembered birthdays. She volunteered at charity events. She always carried peppermint gum because she believed bad breath ruined conversations before they started. My mother adored her. My younger sister borrowed clothes from her. Even my friends used to joke that I had somehow found the last genuinely kind woman in America. Maybe that's why I ignored so many small things. Not because I was blind, because everyone else saw perfection too. Sienna and I had been together almost 6 years. We met during a fundraiser after severe flooding damaged several neighborhoods outside Asheville. I was helping inspect damaged homes. She was organizing volunteers. At the end of that weekend, she handed me a bottle of water and said, "You look like someone who forgets to eat when he's busy." She wasn't wrong. 3 months later, we were dating. 2 years later, we moved into a townhouse together. By year 5, everyone assumed the wedding was coming. They were right. I had spent almost 4 months planning the proposal. I wanted it to happen on the overlook where we'd had our first weekend trip together. Simple, private, no photographers, no audience, just us. The only reason I ended up outside that restaurant was because my meeting ended early. My client canceled dinner. I decided to surprise Sienna. She'd texted earlier saying she was working late with a nonprofit board preparing for a charity auction. I even bought her favorite lemon pastries on the way home. The bakery box was still sitting on the passenger seat when I walked toward the restaurant. Then, I saw her, laughing, relaxed, looking happier than she'd looked with me in months. The man across from her wore a charcoal jacket and no wedding ring. Late 40s, silver at his temples, confident in the quiet way successful people sometimes are. When the waiter arrived, he ordered for both of them. She smiled. She didn't correct him. I don't know why that detail hurt so much. Maybe because Sienna always insisted nobody should order for another adult, except apparently, him. My phone buzzed. A message from Sienna. "Meeting is running late. Don't wait up." I looked through the glass again. She was raising a wine glass. Toasting. To what? I never found out. Because I left. That night, I didn't mention the restaurant. Neither did she. She came home around 10:30 carrying a folder full of printed papers. At least that's what it looked like. She kissed my cheek. I'm exhausted. Long meeting? She smiled. You have no idea. That sentence echoed inside my head. No, I had no idea. The next morning, she found the bakery box. Oh, she smiled. You stopped by? I did. I must have just missed you. Another lie, delivered as casually as asking someone to pass the salt. I wanted to believe there had been an explanation, a donor, a business sponsor, an investor, anything. Instead of accusing her, I started paying attention. Not obsessively, just honestly. Once you stop believing every answer automatically, you notice strange things. She started taking phone calls outside. Not every day, just enough to feel normal. Her phone suddenly lived face down on every table. She began traveling for weekend fundraising retreats. The suitcase she packed for 2 nights somehow contained clothes for almost a week. Little things. Tiny things. The kind you dismiss because no single one proves anything. Until they all begin pointing in the same direction. 2 weeks later, I was loading dishes into the dishwasher when her smartwatch lit up on the kitchen counter. She had forgotten it after charging it overnight. I wasn't trying to read it. The screen simply lit up. One message, only 6 words. Can't wait until Friday. Same cabin? No name, just the letter. E. Before I could think, another message appeared. Missed waking up next to you. My stomach dropped. I stood frozen in the kitchen while the dishwasher hummed beside me. A minute later, Sienna rushed back inside. I forgot my watch. She saw my face. Then she saw the screen. Everything changed. Not dramatically, quietly. Like a bridge beginning to crack long before anyone hears it collapse. She grabbed the watch. I can explain. People always say that, as if explanation has the power to travel backward through time. I asked one question. Who is E? She looked at the floor. A friend. I almost laughed. Friends don't text that. She finally whispered, his name is Everett. How long? Silence. Too much silence. Then, about a year. A year, while we were choosing wedding venues, while my mother was helping Sienna try on dresses, while we were discussing children's names during long drives. A year. I asked if she loved him. She didn't answer. That was answer enough. I walked upstairs, opened the closet, pulled the engagement ring from my jacket pocket. For weeks I'd imagined sliding it onto her finger. Instead, I placed the unopened box on the bed between us. I was going to ask you next Saturday. She stared at it. Her entire body seemed to collapse inward. Tears filled her eyes. Rowan. I raised my hand. No. For the first time in 6 years, I didn't want another explanation, because I had already realized something much worse. Everett wasn't the reason our relationship was ending. He was simply the first secret that had accidentally stepped into the light. And somehow, I knew there were more waiting behind it. People assume I threw her out that night. I didn't. Real life is rarely that dramatic. Sienna slept in the guest room. I stayed in ours. Neither of us slept. Every few hours, I heard footsteps in the hallway. A cabinet opening, the refrigerator door, the bathroom faucet. 2 people moving around the same house like strangers who had accidentally rented the same place. The engagement ring remained unopened on the bed between us until sunrise. The next morning, she made coffee. Not because everything was normal, because routine is the last thing people let go of. I never wanted you to find out like this, she said quietly. I looked out the kitchen window. There isn't a better way to find out you've been living with a lie. She started crying. Real tears. Not loud. Just enough to make me wonder if she was grieving us, or grieving the fact that she no longer had to keep track of two different lives. I ended it, she whispered. When? She hesitated. Last week. I almost smiled. Not because I believed her, because I had already learned that every answer came with a smaller lie hidden inside it. So the messages from yesterday. She looked away. I know how it looks. No, I said calmly. It looks exactly how it is. By noon, she had packed 2 suitcases. She didn't ask to stay. She didn't beg. Before leaving, she stood beside the front door for nearly a minute. I did love you. I believed her. That was the worst part. People imagine betrayal as proof there was never love. Sometimes love is real. It just isn't enough to stop someone from becoming someone you no longer recognize. She picked up her bags. I hope one day you'll forgive me. I didn't answer, because forgiveness wasn't the question keeping me awake anymore. One question was, why would someone planning a future with me risk everything for a man she'd only known a year? The math didn't make sense. Over the next few weeks, I focused on surviving. I canceled the proposal reservation, returned the custom invitations I'd secretly ordered for our engagement party, called my mother. That conversation lasted almost 2 hours. She cried more than I did. At one point, she said, I thought she was already part of the family. So did I. Friends tried to help. Most meant well. You'll find someone better. Everything happens for a reason. At least you found out before the wedding. Those sentences irritated me more than the silence, because they assumed the pain came from losing Sienna. It didn't. The pain came from discovering that the future I'd spent 6 years building had never actually existed. About a month later, I ran into someone I hadn't seen in years. Her name was Celeste. She had worked with Sienna at the nonprofit where they first met. We bumped into each other at a grocery store on a rainy Saturday. She looked surprised. Rowan. We talked for a few minutes. Then she asked carefully, How are you holding up? I'm getting there. She nodded. Then she said something that changed everything. I always wondered when you'd find out. The words hit harder than I expected. Find out what? She immediately looked uncomfortable. I shouldn't have said anything. No. I stepped closer. You already did. She looked around the nearly empty aisle before lowering her voice. Everett wasn't the first. I felt every sound in the store disappear. What? She closed her eyes for a second. I thought you knew. We sat in the small coffee shop next door. Neither of us touched our drinks. Celeste stared at the table for almost a minute before speaking. When Sienna started working with us, she was seeing someone. I know. Not Everett. I frowned. No. A board member. I felt my heartbeat speeding up. Who? A man named Victor Ashe. The name meant nothing to me. He was married. Celeste nodded. The relationship lasted almost 2 years. 2 years. That meant before Everett, before the proposal, before almost everything. You knew? I found out by accident. And you never told me? She looked like she hated herself. I tried. What does that mean? I told Sienna she had to tell you. And? She quit the nonprofit the following week. I stared through the cafe window. Cars moved slowly through the rain. People carried umbrellas. Everyone else was living an ordinary Saturday. Mine had just fallen apart all over again. So Everett, Celeste sighed. I think he believed he was the only one. I laughed once. It sounded empty. So did I. She nodded sadly. Rowan, this wasn't about one affair. I looked at her. What do you mean? I think Sienna liked becoming whoever someone needed. The sentence stayed with me. Not because it excused anything, because suddenly, it explained almost everything. With me, she loved stability. With Victor, she became ambitious. With Everett, she became adventurous. Different stories, different versions, different lives. That evening I drove home instead of back to work. The townhouse felt strangely quiet. Half the closets were empty. Her books were gone. The hallway smelled faintly of the lavender candles she used to buy every autumn. For the first time since she left, I wasn't thinking about getting her back. I was trying to understand whether I'd ever really known her. 3 weeks later, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Mr. Mercer? Yes. My name is Leonard Brooks. I believe you were engaged to Sienna Hale. My grip tightened around the phone. Who is this? There was a long pause. Then he quietly said, I'm Everett's father. I didn't speak. Leonard's voice sounded tired. My son passed away yesterday. The room spun. What? He was killed in a motorcycle accident. I closed my eyes. For a moment, I couldn't remember how to breathe. I'm sorry. I know this is unusual. He hesitated. But before he died, he asked me to find you. Every instinct in my body told me the conversation was about to reveal something I wasn't prepared to hear. And deep down, I already knew Everett hadn't been the last secret Sienna was hiding. For the rest of that afternoon, I couldn't stop thinking about Everett. Not because he had been the man Sienna cheated on me with, because he was dead. And somehow, his father believed I needed to know something. We agreed to meet the next morning at a small diner just outside Spartanburg. Leonard Brooks arrived exactly on time. He looked older than his 68 years, the kind of older that grief gives people in a single night. He carried a worn leather envelope. He didn't order breakfast. Neither did I. I'm sorry you had to come, I said. He nodded. So am I. For a while, we simply sat there. Finally, he pushed the envelope across the table. My son wanted you to have this if anything ever happened to him. I frowned. Why me? Because he said you deserved the truth more than anyone. The words made no sense. I opened the envelope. Inside were printed emails, copies of bank transfers, photographs, and a handwritten letter. None of them were addressed to me. Every single one was addressed to Everett. The letter began with only one sentence. Everett, if you're reading this, I couldn't keep lying to both of us anymore. It was signed, Sienna. My hands started shaking. I looked up at Leonard. You've read this? He nodded once. I thought you should. I looked back down. The letter wasn't a love letter. It wasn't even an apology. It was a confession. Sienna admitted she had never been honest with Everett about me. She told him we had already separated, that our relationship existed only because selling the townhouse had become complicated, that I refused to move out. Every sentence painted me as someone I wasn't. I laughed quietly, not because it was funny, because I suddenly realized she had built two different realities, one for me, one for Everett, and in both stories, she was the victim. Then I reached the last page. Everything inside me stopped. Sienna wrote, "There's one thing I've never told you. Rowan has been paying most of our living expenses for years. Without him, none of this would have been possible. I read it again, then a third time. Everett had known. Not everything, but enough. Leonard watched my face. My son found out about 6 months ago. What happened? He confronted her. And? Leonard sighed deeply. She told him she needed time to leave you. I closed my eyes. There it was again. Time. Always more time. Always another promise. Always another version of tomorrow. Leonard reached into the envelope again. There was something else. He handed me several bank statements. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then I recognized the address. The townhouse. Our townhouse. Monthly utility payments. Internet. Property taxes. Insurance. Every bill had been paid from my account, while large transfers had quietly left Sienna's personal account every month. Destination, Blue Ridge Holdings. What is this? Leonard answered. My son rented a cabin from that company. A cabin. Suddenly, the smartwatch message came back to me. Same cabin, only it wasn't a vacation cabin, it was a house. One Sienna had been paying for nearly 3 years, not with my money, with hers. Money she had secretly earned. I don't understand. Leonard nodded slowly. I didn't either. He pulled out one final document. An LLC registration. Owner, Sienna Hale. She wasn't just volunteering anymore. 3 years earlier, she'd quietly started a nonprofit consulting company. She helped charities organize fundraising campaigns across 3 states. The business was successful. Very successful. Last year's income alone exceeded $200,000. I stared at the paperwork. During all those years, she kept telling me money was tight. She insisted we postpone vacations, delay remodeling the kitchen, cancel our anniversary trip to Italy because it wasn't responsible. Meanwhile, she had built an entirely separate business without ever telling me. I looked at Leonard. Did Everett know? He thought she was saving to start over with him. I laughed again. It sounded hollow. So we were both financing different versions of her future. He nodded. I believe so. Before leaving, Leonard said something I never forgot. My son wasn't a good man. I looked at him. He knew she was living with someone. He accepted lies because they benefited him. Leonard folded his hands. But the last few months, he realized she'd lied to him too. I said nothing. My son died believing he had ruined another man's life. The diner suddenly felt too small. I don't hate him, I said quietly. Leonard looked surprised. I thought I would. I looked at the envelope one last time. But I think we were both just standing in different rooms of the same lie. Over the next year, I sold the townhouse. Not because I couldn't afford it. Because every room reminded me of conversations that had never been real. I left Greenville, accepted a position with one of the fastest-growing architectural firms in Nashville. The projects were larger, the responsibility heavier. Within 5 years, I became a partner, then a shareholder. Eventually, my name appeared on buildings I had once only dreamed of designing. People assumed success erased heartbreak. It doesn't. It simply gives grief somewhere quieter to sit. I stopped talking about Sienna, stopped searching her name, stopped wondering where she had gone. Life moved forward the way rivers do, not because they forget the rocks, because they keep flowing anyway. Then, 8 years after the engagement ring never left my pocket, my assistant knocked on my office door. Mr. Mercer, there's someone here asking for you. She says you knew her a long time ago. I looked up from the blueprints. What's her name? My assistant hesitated. Sienna. For a moment, I honestly thought I'd heard the wrong name, until she added quietly, she says she just wants 5 minutes. And somehow, I knew those 5 minutes were about to reveal the final truth she had hidden all those years. For a few seconds, I just stared at my assistant. Sienna? She nodded. She's waiting downstairs. I looked through the glass wall of my office. 8 years. 8 years since I'd watched her hold another man's hand while an engagement ring sat in my coat pocket. 8 years since I'd sold the townhouse. 8 years since I promised myself I would never build my future around someone else's promises again. I stood up. Not because I wanted answers, because I wanted to see what time had done. She was sitting alone in the reception area. For a moment, I almost didn't recognize her. Not because she looked older. We both did. It was something else. The confidence she used to carry into every room had disappeared. Her shoulders were lower. Her smile seemed uncertain, as if she'd rehearsed it several times before I walked in. She stood. Hi, Rowan. I nodded. Hi. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, she smiled awkwardly. You've done well. I looked around the office. Architectural models lined the shelves. Awards hung on the walls. Large windows overlooked downtown Nashville. The company now employed nearly 200 people. I'd spent almost a decade building something that belonged entirely to me. It took a while, I said. She looked down. I've been following your work. I'm sure you have. There was no anger in my voice, just distance. She asked if we could get coffee. I almost said no. Instead, we walked across the street to a quiet cafe. Ironically, it looked very similar to the restaurant where I'd first seen her with Everett. Life has strange ways of bringing familiar scenes back to you. She wrapped both hands around a paper cup. I owe you an apology. You already gave me one 8 years ago. It wasn't enough. No, it wasn't. She looked out the window. I've thought about that every day. I didn't answer. Not because I wanted her to suffer, because some apologies don't need replies. After a long silence, she finally said, Everett wasn't the end. I looked at her. What do you mean? He wasn't the last person I tried building a life with. That didn't surprise me. She noticed. I figured it wouldn't. She gave a sad little laugh. I kept thinking happiness was somewhere else. She looked down at her coffee. So I kept leaving. She told me what happened after Everett died. She sold the consulting company, moved to Colorado, started over with another man she'd met through work. 2 years later, that relationship ended too. Then another, then another. Each one began with certainty. Each one ended the same way. I always thought the next life would finally feel right. She smiled bitterly. It never did. I listened quietly. For years, I'd imagined this conversation. In my imagination, I confronted her, asked every question, made her understand exactly what she'd destroyed. Instead, I mostly felt tired. Time had quietly removed the anger and left something much heavier. Acceptance. Then she reached into her purse. I brought something. She slid a small envelope across the table. Inside was a cashier's check. $42,000. I frowned. What's this? The money. What money? The money you spent supporting me while I was secretly building my business. I looked back at the check. I calculated everything. She swallowed. I know it isn't all of it. I know it can't fix anything. But it's yours. For several moments, I simply looked at it. Then I slid it back. I don't want it. Her eyes widened. Rowan, you already paid. She looked confused. No. You did. She blinked. I don't understand. I smiled gently. The hardest years of my life forced me to become the man sitting across from you. I looked around the cafe. If you hadn't left, I would have married you. I would have stayed comfortable. I would have never moved. I would have never taken the job in Nashville. I would have never started my own firm. I paused. I'm not grateful for what you did, but I'm grateful I survived it. For the first time that afternoon, she cried. Not quietly, not dramatically, just honestly. I'm so sorry, I believed her. Finally, because there was nothing left for her to gain. Before leaving, she asked one last question. Did you ever marry? I smiled. No. She looked disappointed. I thought maybe... I shook my head. You weren't waiting for me? The question surprised us both. I couldn't help smiling. No. I simply stopped believing that my life had to be complete by a certain age. I stood. My happiness stopped depending on whether someone stayed. She nodded slowly. I spent years hoping you'd give me another chance. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I said something I'd never truly understood until that day. You don't miss me. She frowned. You miss the version of yourself who still believed she hadn't destroyed something good. Her face crumpled. She didn't argue, because she knew it was true. As I walked back toward my office, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my sister. A picture of her twin boys covered in flour after helping bake cookies. Family dinner Sunday? Mom already said you're bringing dessert? I smiled. 8 years earlier, I would have canceled work to chase someone who had already left. Now, I hurried back because people were waiting who had never made me question whether I belonged. That evening, I stayed late at the office. Not because I had to, because I enjoyed the quiet after everyone else had gone home. The city lights reflected against the windows, while unfinished blueprints covered my desk. One of the interns had accidentally left a small, sticky note attached to a project folder. It read, "Strong foundations last longer." I laughed softly. That was probably meant for the building, but it felt like life had finally explained itself. Love isn't proven by how hard you fight to keep someone. It's proven by how peacefully you can walk away when they stop choosing you. Before leaving, I opened the bottom drawer of my desk. Inside was the same small white ring box, still unopened. Not because I couldn't let go, because it reminded me of something important. Some promises aren't meant to be fulfilled. They're meant to teach you never to settle for half of someone again. I turned off the office lights, closed the drawer, and this time, I walked away without looking back.